when she is here protected by this very alliance, talking about how she despises it, it felt really luxurious from her, and like she doesn't appreciate what she has.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm James Heale and I'm delighted to be joined this week by our Ukraine reporter, Svitlana Morenets. Now, this week, Svitlana, you've made a rare foray into British domestic politics in one sense, because Zarah Sultana, Coventry's answer to Citizen Smith, unfortunately hit the headlines this week after suggesting that President Zelensky was no friend of the working classes. Tell us how this made you feel.
Well, to be honest, I didn't know about Zarah's existence before I saw the clips of her latest interview on former Twitter, and where she said that, of course, Putin is a dictator against her, but Zelensky isn't a friend of the working class either.
Putin is a dictator, a gangster, and there are war crimes that have been committed, but Zelensky isn't a friend of the working class either, and those were the voices that I was hearing in Paris. The only people that benefit from conflict in Ukraine and in Gaza or anywhere else are arms manufacturers and people who profit from the arms industry, and that is the kind of economy that we should be not prioritizing. The fact that the UK sells arms to Israel, the fact that we sell arms to the UAE, which fuel conflict in Sudan, and the fact that arms manufacturers in this country, whether it's BAE, Leonardo and others, benefit from what is happening in Ukraine is harrowing, and we should put all of our efforts in stopping war.
And I felt like she was equalizing them, and it felt really unfair because Zelensky didn't start this war. It is not his fault, and he doesn't have a choice but to fight back. And of course, I felt that I had to speak up to her because of that. And also all her quotes about NATO is an imperialist war machine, the Kremlin talking points, to be honest, and that Britain should withdraw from the alliance and that we shouldn't pump money into arms manufacturers, but focus all of our efforts in ending the war in Ukraine. I felt these were really dangerous arguments because if she wants to know what happens to a country that gives up its main deterrent, defensive deterrent, she should go to Ukraine and see what happens to a country that gives up its nuclear weapons. NATO alliance is a kind of deterrent against the other countries who would like to start a war. So I think it's really, really dangerous rhetoric, and I had to write something about that.
Yes, there's a wonderful line in your piece where you said that she will do almost anything for the working classes except listen to them.
Well, yes, because I think if she really talked to people on the ground in Ukraine, not just on the conference in Paris, talking to Russians and Ukrainians, she would understand the war in Ukraine better. Because after all, it is the Ukrainian working class who right now is in the army and fighting back against the Russian forces. And this is the Russian working class soldiers that sign up contracts with the defense ministry, and they are killing Ukrainians for cash. And when you look at it like that, it really changes your perspective.
Yeah, this is the curious thing about Zarah Sultana and some of those on the left of British politics, which is that they always preach lived experience, the importance of, if you're going to be talking about a certain area, for instance, what it's like to experience racism, you will have to be someone from an ethnic minority, for instance. But when it comes to Ukrainians, it seems that the lived experience of Ukrainians, someone such as yourself, who's watched many friends serve in this conflict, that is invalid. And actually somehow those purporting to speak for Ukrainians are actually better than the Ukrainians speaking themselves.
I really hope that she would answer to my article, because I'm myself from a working class background. I come from a village. I grew up really, really poor. And
We've changed that at the Spectator, don't we?
No, my mom works at the factory 12-hour shifts and earns like £4,000 a year. Even for Ukraine, it's really, really low salary. And I hope she would listen to me, but I'm not sure if she even read that article at all. And I really saw that my friends in Ukraine were also reading it, and they felt really enraged by what she was saying about Ukraine and about NATO, because for Ukraine it's a big dream to be a member of this alliance, because they felt like if Ukraine was a NATO member before, that Russia wouldn't invade, but of course it is too late right now. And to talk so easily about leaving such a of course, without its flaws, but this alliance is great, and it served its purpose. It deters the wars. And when she is here under the peaceful skies, protected by this very alliance, talking about how she despises it, it felt really luxurious from her, and like she doesn't appreciate what she has. And I really wish that if we that she was right about if we stop investing in the weapons and investing instead in welfare, then there would be no wars and we would all live better. I wish it was the reality, but it isn't. And Ukraine has shown that if you don't have a strong army, you don't have a lot of weapons, somebody is going to invade you.
Yeah, absolutely right, I think. And that's been quite a striking trend in British politics I've seen, Svitlana, is we've had Zach Polanski get elected as the leader of the Green Party. He's been very critical of things such as NATO previously in his party, and obviously Zarah Sultana wants to pull out of NATO. But I suppose what you're saying is that actually it's very easy to make these claims when you're here under the comfort of NATO, but the experience of people in Ukraine and also some of the Baltic states, they really wanted to join NATO. Actually, our perception of NATO is very different from how those countries which have lived under the kind of Iron Curtain, what they perceive it as.
So the countries, especially in Eastern Europe, they wanted to join NATO because they were afraid that Russia was going to attack them, and it was their only chance to avoid the war. And Ukraine did the same, but unfortunately we were not so lucky to join. But yes, that's the case.
Tell us how the NATO membership debate is currently in Ukraine. Is that the sense that all parties are committed to joining NATO once the war is concluded?
I think Ukrainians kind of lost hope that it's gonna really happen, because sooner or later this war is gonna end in some kind of ceasefire, and both sides will have to give up something. It's a very famous phrase right now, but it's true. And I think that giving up that possibility of joining NATO membership, it's what Ukraine can allow itself to do. So I think people right now don't believe that Ukraine will become a part of NATO really soon.
One of the things that was interesting about Zarah Sultana's video was that she seems quite exceptional in that, unlike every other British politician who most of them say, support for Ukraine, Slav Ukrainer, etc. Her points were quite out there, and talking about Zelensky not being a friend of the working class. For me, it was so striking because everyone else in the British establishment, British political elites, has been so pro-Ukraine. How typical are Zara's comments of other people on the left of British politics?
I was always amazed how big support was for Ukraine among British politics and also the British public. And you could see from the beginning of the full-scale war that London was there leading with the weapons, with the arms deliveries, with everything, with support for Volodymyr Zelensky. And Ukrainians really, including myself, have been really grateful for that support, because without that, many more Ukrainians would have died, and maybe there won't be free and independent Ukraine. That's why it was so striking for me to see her repeating Russia's talking points. And of course it was disappointing, but I understand that as a Ukrainian voice here, it is my job to try to show her the other perspective, and maybe she will change her mind, or to show to her supporters where I think she is wrong.
And how typical, she said those remarks with regards to a left conference in Paris. Has it tended to be the left or the right around the world which are more or less supportive of Ukraine?
I wouldn't like to generalize.
Sure.
I would say the left were more supportive.
Right.
And because, for example, with the arrival of Donald Trump to the office, the Republicans were quite critical of the aid in Ukraine, and actually the narrative was there quite similar, that we should just stop giving weapons to Ukraine and talk peace and negotiate with Russia. And they tried it, and for 9 months Trump and all his team have been negotiating with Putin and Russia, and they couldn't agree even on one-day ceasefire, even not talking about full-scale ceasefire. So Zara's approach that we should just talk peace and then we will have peace, it simply doesn't work.
Thank you very much, Svitlana, for joining us on Spectator TV today.
Thank you.